Time again for another episode of CRM Radio Today. The only show that takes a look at the ever-changing CRM space with the people who started it all, Goldmine. Good folks at Goldmine. And Stacy Gentile, part of that organization's with us here today. Here, I'm good. You know, I'm just laughing. That's why I'm screwing up the intro a little bit here. But, you know, every time when we do this show, I call the guest beforehand and I kind of warm them up, say, hey, I understand you're going to be a guest here today. And your guest had the funniest answer I've ever heard here. He said, and I quote, when I called him up and said, hey, you're going to be on the show, he said, must be some kind of clerical mistake.
It's all a clerical mistake.
It's all a clerical mistake.
That's how I ended up here.
So I just had to bring that up. That was the funniest answer in 6 years I've ever heard to this thing. So hopefully it's not a clerical mistake. Hopefully you guys have got a clear call to action today here. What are we talking about and who are we talking to?
Well, today's guest is Josh Miles, who hails from the great state of Indianapolis. Actually, he's from Carmel in Indianapolis, which is like the Scottsdale of Indy. Isn't that right, Josh?
It's the cherry on top, baby.
It is.
Cherry on top.
Josh is a man of many talents in marketing and many, many job titles. Geez, Josh, you got a lot of titles here. Let's see. You're the Chief Marketing Officer for the Society for Marketing Professional Services and the Chief Marketing Officer for, how do you pronounce that?
It's Codalicious. So it's...
Codalicious. There we go. Yeah,
curriculum.
Yeah.
Must be.
I think it was
I
think it was a clerical error on his part here, and then I'll duck out.
All right, Josh. So let's jump right into it. What you're a marketing expert. You're a speaker. You gave a couple of TED Talks, and I know you ran a decent sized ad agency there in Indianapolis, and you've got a lot of experience in marketing. So when you take a look at the landscape and business and what's going on with marketing, what are some of the key things that you're seeing?
Well, if it's not clear just from all of that nonsense and the job titles, marketing is just in constant state of flux. If there's anything that we can hang our hats on right now, is that things are just going to get more complicated and continue to change. If you're feeling comfortable in your marketing role today, don't get too comfortable, because tomorrow's probably going to look a little different.
Right. It seems like it's just accelerating. I mean, when you take a look at like the marketing stack of 10 years ago, it was go hire an ad agency and do a lot of media buys, right? Or maybe 15 years ago. Nowadays, it's like the marketing stack is ginormous. There's so many things that marketers have to do nowadays, and especially like when you're talking to CMOs or people running agencies, there's just so many new tools and so much more data coming at them. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it was actually one of the first exercises that I put myself through at SMPS, was to take a look at what their marketing stack was and what their larger technology stack was, just to understand where data was coming from. And I just put it on my to-do list again a little over a year later, because so much of it has changed, and I'm not sure we've all even got our arms around all the things that our current technologies can do, let alone maybe some opportunities to add to that. Or should we be looking at SMS messaging and adding that to our portfolio? Well, probably is a good short answer to that.
It's just so much more exponentially complicated to be like a director of marketing or a CMO, because there's just so many tools. And it's hard to know like everything, right? So you almost have to have a team of 50 people who each of which is an expert in one thing, because the days, I think, of the marketing guy who's the one-all be-all are kind of over, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're always very fortunate to have people who are multi-dimensional in their skill set. But absolutely, I mean, all of the places that we're adding technology, or as a guy I chatted with a couple weeks ago was talking about, businesses that are not necessarily tech companies, but they're tech-enabled. And we had kind of joked, like, man, the boutique down on the corner is going to be a tech-enabled company like tomorrow. This is such a real problem, or a real area of change for everyone. Good news or bad news is a lot of that is rolling up to the marketing director or the CMO, the VP of marketing. If it's technology, or if it interacts with the marketing tech at any level, it kind of ends up in your seat. So it's something you have to get comfortable with really quickly.
Would you say then that the role of the director of marketing is getting easier or harder? And it's a bit of a trick question because I think the CMOs or the director of marketings are maybe getting a little less hands-on than they used to be, but there's so much more that they have to manage and tools they have to manage and people that it might be getting more complicated. So it's an interesting question. Do you think that role is getting easier or harder?
You've hit it on the head. I think it's getting broader in terms of here are all the things that you're continuing to encompass. A micromanaging type in the CMO seat or someone who feels like they have to do all the things themselves are going to be really quickly overwhelmed at the idea of just a daily task list. So I think it's imperative that the modern CMO is comfortable talking about strategy and familiar enough with all the moving parts that they can have intelligent conversations and weigh in on decisions to bring value to things. But it's just impossible to be a master of CRM and email and social strategy and blogging and how to write and what design is eye-catching and how to create video and how this all connects to our association management database. And there's just so many moving parts to it that at some point you have to go upstream or downstream, and I think upstream is where it's at for the CMO.
When you're in your role and when you're talking to some of your peers, what are some of the big challenges that you hear more often than not? Like, what are the big things that folks are wrestling with right now?
Well, I think the world that I'm in at the moment is association, which is sort of a niche piece of the nonprofit world, and kind of joked in the past that if you want to know what the future of marketing is like for associations, just look at what retail is doing today. And I think it's not that associations and nonprofits don't know what they should be doing, but just undertaking things like a big integration project or moving to a new data management platform or moving to a new marketing automation platform. Those are major things that can really sideline teams for months. Finding good partners and people that you can trust and prioritizing those projects are some of the bigger challenges. And then in the association world as well, we kind of play in two places, which is dues and non-dues revenue. That's, to put it in plain English, we get money when people join our association, and we get money when they hang out with us and do things or, buy books or go to conferences. So those are constant challenges, I think, for most associations, is kind of balancing those two things. And even recently, we've been having discussions about how do we add additional revenue streams that aren't those two traditional concepts.
I think you touched on the education there. It's because I think there's so much more tools and the knowledge and data streams all coming into marketing. Do you think there's a plentiful kind of number of places that people can go and get education? I know from my own personal experiences, I've kind of stopped going to conferences because it always seems to me like most of the conferences I go to are like marketing 101. It's like, well, yeah, the sky's blue, water's still wet. I get that, but where's the deep dive on things? So, what's kind of your assessment about how marketing experts are improving or staying up to education with all these things coming at them?
The interesting thing is that even though that's the business I'm in, I just found myself registering for a marketing conference in the fall to go to Adobe Max to do something to feed me that's kind of, if anybody puts on a good show and does a great marketing conference, I would hope it's Adobe. I've yet to be at one of those, so I'm really curious to kind of see how the big boys do that kind of conference, if you will, and see what kind of things we can bring back to ours. But I think in our world, our members are marketers and business developers in the architecture, engineering, and construction world. So we're looking to bring very niche education to them and, not just the 101 kind of content, although we also have members who are 1 year into their job. So it's important to have content that falls through that continuum. So we've got introductory concepts, not just of here's what marketing is and how it works, but here's what marketing is in our industry and how you can apply it and hone your skills. These are not necessarily things you're learning about marketing in college or at the university level. And then at the same time, we have to create offerings and have created offerings for our most senior marketers. So things that really are thought-provoking for vice presidents or the directors or the CMOs of a group that are going to inspire them to think differently about how they do marketing. And again, like you said, not just getting stuck in the 101 level stuff.
Right, because it's so easy to do, because I think that's like the bulk of everything that's being put out there. So if you're in charge of a marketing department and you're looking at this education stuff and you're combining it with some of the biggest trends that you see going out there, where do you think the focus really needs to be on paying attention to the trends? Is it, it used to be content or digital? Where's the big hot button nowadays in the marketing departments that they need to focus on?
There's no shortage of hot buttons, and I think identifying what's the right hot button for your organization is the bigger question. And for me, that comes down to really a strategy question. So understanding, it's easy to look at what your neighbor or another organization is doing and think, well, they're doing really cool stuff on Instagram, so that's where we should be putting all of our effort, is Instagram. But if that doesn't actually align to your goals and objectives, then that particular strategy is probably going to be a big fail for you. I think there's no shortage of shiny tactics. It's the question, is audio right for my brand? Is video right for my brand? Is blogging right for my brand? Or is it in-person events? So again, kind of going back to the conference thing, I think the difference between the content that you might find at one of our conferences versus what you could Google or find on a YouTube video may be incredibly similar. The difference is the experience of going through that with your peers in person and network that you build at those conferences. So again, for us, that strategy works really well for in-person events, but that would be horrible for your industry. It just kind of depends on what those goals and objectives look like.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's going to take us to the halftime break. We're going to take a quick commercial break. And Josh, when we come back, let's talk about how to be more intentional, like you mentioned. And let's also talk about some of the things that you think are good and bad that companies are doing on the flip side. Take it away, Paul.
We know you rely on your CRM system, and it's usually a love-hate relationship. Most CRM systems, well, let's face it, they're expensive. They're hard to understand. People don't use them properly. And you're probably paying for features that you don't even want. If that's your case, then maybe it's time to simplify. It's time to get more from your CRM. Why don't you go back to the original? Trust Goldmine. We helped pioneer the industry, after all. Goldmine CRM is, well, it's simple, it's affordable, and it's proven. If all those sound appealing to you, if you're just tired of the CRM headaches that you're getting from trying to implement something that's just too complicated, too expensive, and too much for you to figure out, then why not go back to the original? Visit Goldmine today, goldmine.com. Let's revisit and go back to the rest of this conversation with Stacy and his guest.
Right. Yeah. Josh kind of steered us in the right direction there just before the break, talking about organizations needing to be intentional, which is a big thing that I always talk about with their marketing and branding strategies. Josh, do you think companies are doing as a whole are doing a good job at figuring out their why or their being intent, or are they just kind of like stuck in Stewardsville and just trying to keep the ship going?
Well, I think there's far too many organizations that even if they do have a true heartfelt why and they have something that drives them forward, I think too few organizations do a good job of communicating that and communicating it in a, call it what's in it for me, or call it the Simon Sinek why, or I think there are a lot of ways to frame it, but putting your customer, your client in the story. One of my favorite recent books that I've read is Story Brand by Donald Miller, and the way he talks about framing things differently, where the customer or the client is actually the hero of your story, not you, because nobody calls you. Yeah. Because they want to hear about you. They want you to help them fix them or solve their problem or help them win the day. I think that's where most companies and most organizations probably fall down, is their message is far too we focused, and nobody likes when they we on themselves. Right.
It's like they don't buy the drill, they want the hole. right? Those types
Right.
of things. And it's probably easier for like a startup or a early stage business to kind of figure that because they've pretty much got a blank slate, right? So they can kind of create it before they get too entrenched in things. But I think the vast majority of companies are already established. They may or may not realize that they've got a challenge there. So why do you think it's difficult for an existing company to kind of rethink their why?
I think maybe even going to the adage that you were referring back to, the whole, they don't buy the drill bit, they buy the hole. I had the incredible opportunity a couple months back to chat with Seth Godin, and he was unpacking that exact same idea. And he said, it's not that people want the hole. Nobody wants a hole. They want the shelf on the wall. And actually, they don't want the shelf on the wall. They want their wife to be happy because they finally get the project done. So I think even taking the concept far enough to understand really what the benefit or the driver is for the customer or the client is just doing that extra hard work of thinking through what is it really that we're helping people do. You know, what line of business are we in, and what problem is this actually solving on the end? And like you said, startups maybe have a cleaner slate, but I don't know that necessarily makes them any better at it, because most startups are still figuring out what business it is that they're in and what value they're delivering to the customers. I mean, maybe to get to a shorter answer, I think going out and asking your audience, your customers, your clients, why did you choose us? What difference did we make for you? Why did you choose us over someone else? Why would you sometimes choose someone else over us? And I think there's nothing better than kind of getting it directly from your client to understand what difference you make in their life.
You know, as marketers, the concept of why or any of the Seth Godin stuff, or, you know, there's a number of people that really kind of try to drive that point home about the why, or the analogy between the hole and the drill. But when you look at the landscape of businesses out there and the way they're approaching the market, it doesn't seem like that's taking a hold. You know, I think marketers, we get it in our heads, but it's so hard to get out of the product, feature, price, quality type thing. I don't seem to really understand why that's so difficult to break those habits. Do you?
I think some of it comes back to positioning. And one way to think about this is, good news, we're in a really great economy for the most part. And there's lots of opportunity for lots of people. So even people who don't quite get their story right, or they do a subpar job of marketing, they're probably still going to make money. They're still going to be able to do things from a sales standpoint. But the difference is that the brands that really become preferred and the ones that create a following are the ones that carve out a really unique space in their customer's mind. And that's what I call positioning. That's kind of where, when you think of that mental picture of a thing or a need, that's the only brand you think of, or that's the first thing that you think of. And I think that's the closest thing in my mind to a silver bullet that we've ever had in marketing, is being able to own the mental space in your customer or target market's mind. I think that's just gold.
Right. And, I think there's a couple of approaches in the marketing world that kind of dealt with that. I know back in, must have been like in 2005 or something, when I was living out of a suitcase and working with 300 of the biggest brands in the country. I'd always talk about, really at the forefront, about experiential marketing and lifestyle branding. And I think there's some companies, usually the bigger companies, who really tap into that well to get that mind share. But even now in 2019, coming up on 2020, I still don't think that the whole experiential marketing or lifestyle branding thing's really caught fire the way that it should.
I think you have the challenge of, as soon as somebody starts to carve out a new space, that's where you invite everyone else to emulate, whether you like it or not. You're going to have some copycats. And the more you have Me Too's out there, the more either you're kind of just reinforcing the look of the original thing or the message of the original thing, or it really starts to muddy the water. So I always used to say, a Target commercial when it comes on the television before you know that it's Target. It's just something about the look and the feel. Then I started seeing Kohl's and JCPenney and other brands trying to do the same light, bubbly, avant-garde kind of look that Target did. And immediately when those commercials came on, I thought it was Target. So instead of me feeling differently about Kohl's, all of a sudden I'm still thinking about Target, even though Kohl's is trying to step out in a similar place. So in my mind, those kinds of things just totally backfire. Yeah, as we get these trends of whether it's customer journey or whether it's experiential or whether, there's a new flavor all the time. And not that any of those ideas are bad. It's when somebody starts to carve out that space, that's when the copycats show up.
Yeah. On this program, we've had a number of guests recently come on and talk about, the generational differences and those kind of things. And the focus, when you start talking about that, always seems to go to the millennials. Almost everything as it's concerned for millennial marketing is around those experiences. It's around the lifestyle marketing, community type things. There's a different way to communicate towards those. And I get a little concerned when I see so many companies kind of whiffing on that, knowing where their buyers are is like the large group of millennials. Do you equally find that as troubling? Or, from a marketing standpoint, the economy would be fine and everything. But from a marketing standpoint, do you think that when marketers are whiffing on it that bad, is it bad?
I think if anything, we've got I don't know if it's a bigger challenge, but it's at least a different challenge with the generation coming up behind them. With Gen Z, or whatever label ultimately fits them. But, all the grads that are happening now down to my 7-year-old, I think it's a pretty broad categorization at this point. I may end up chunking up even further, but they're a different animal and they're going to have different preferences. So as soon as we've sort of locked in this idea that everything needs to appeal to millennials, it's going to shift again really soon.
Right. So I think that's a pretty good segue into maybe one of the final topics to talk about today is what role and how important is data in marketing? Man,
data is the is the $1 million problem, right? So, we talked at the top of the show about some of the challenges going on in my world, and specifically in my world, we're working on integrations with a new payment processing technology that's going to roll down to all of our chapters, and we're also working on some new marketing automation. And it's not that either of those tools are challenging in and of themselves. The bigger challenge is it pulling all of the right data? Are we actually getting the information that we want to get? Is this actually getting the real birth dates? Is it really getting the renewal date?
Right. So now marketers are expected to be data experts too. So that kind of brings us to the end of the show. Josh, if somebody wanted to continue the communication with you, how could they get a hold of you?
Twitter at Josh Miles, and they can learn more about SMPS at smps.org.
Awesome. Well, hey, Josh, it was nice catching up, and it was great having you on the program today. Wish we had more time.
You've been listening to another example of CRM Radio Today, brought to you by the good folks at Goldmine, right here in the Funnel Radio Network for at-work listeners like you.